So we're hosting this lunchtime session with a number of speakers sharing with you their campaign approaches, their lived experiences, and also their reflections on what works well. In a way, it's our lunchtime, so it's a bit like a buffet course with lots of different dishes. So we hope you enjoy this part, and that as you digest their words and their thoughts and ideas, you might consider a question that you'd like to ask the speakers later on in what we could call the pudding round of this session together later. So today we want to discuss what it means for our streets to be walkable, to enable the whole population to navigate our streets, our pavements, and our public spaces. Together, we can explore maybe what attitudes need to change, what practical steps can we take, what pressure maybe we need to put on the people in power, and then what do we need to call for and how. So as a charity in Living Streets, we talk a lot about walking and how we want people to be able to choose it as their main mode of transport for short journeys. But we also talk a lot about how we can improve walking infrastructure with adequate pavement area, navigable surfaces, dropped curbs, resting places along the way. And all of these elements making our street space accessible by design. But what we're here to discuss today are elements of that, but also the obstructions that get in the way of what can be quite highly contested area or space for pedestrians. So the impact of such things as advertising boards, extended seating areas, new or old signage, rubbish bins, they have an effect on people's lives. And any kind of street clutter can affect our routes from A to B, how long a journey takes, and how pleasurable it is, how it affects our independence, our confidence, and our ability to get around. So today we will hear from members of our campaigns and policy team in Living Streets. We have two of our local Living Streets groups speaking, who we see as the innovators, really, addressing issues head on. And we're really honoured to be working in partnership with RNIB, Guide Dogs, and Transport for All, who you'll be hearing from today as well. So all of us campaign organisations are holding actions relating to reclaiming our pavement. So it's very much of the now. So let's talk together about clutter. Let's talk about the barriers in society which could easily be removed with the political will, public support, and businesses if they centred access as integral to their decision making. So the first speaker I'd like to call to the floor is David Spavin from Living Streets Edinburgh, talking about our Living Streets group who led the campaign about removing street clutter and how they did it.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Spavin. I'm struggling, however, to get the video working. It says start video here.
There we go.
Oh, there we are. There we are. I'm David Spavin. I'm from Living Streets Edinburgh group. I'm 69. I'm bald, but with what I like to think is a rather neatly trimmed goatee beard. And what I'm going to do today, I hope you can all see this okay. I'd like to tell you about our campaign to tackle pavement clutter and how we secured £300,000 from the City of Edinburgh Council to implement it. For the first slide, I thought it would be useful to talk about the origins of our campaign. And this was when we undertook a street audit in a district of Edinburgh called Toll Cross, along with the local community council. And what we found there was that there were all kinds of clutter along streets. But one of the biggest problems was advertising boards, or A boards. So we began pressing the City Council as regards their policy right across the city. Unfortunately, we had no interest from the active travel section of the council, which for a long time now has been very much dominated by a cycling perspective. So we looked to other departments, and what we found was that we got a positive response from the planning department. And on the second slide, I'm just going to go through what we saw as our A board's victory. It was a 4-year campaign, so there was quite a long slog involved. We had a number of key supporters: the Edinburgh Access Panel, who represents people with disabilities, the Old Town Community Council in the centre of Edinburgh, the Royal National Institute for the Blind, and Tollcross Community Council. And as a result of that campaign, the council introduced a citywide temporary ban in 2018 and then a permanent ban on A-boards in 2019. And that was very successful in helping to clear the clutter from our streets. Yeah, so we decided we really needed to follow this through because, as the first bullet point shows, while A-boards were a significant source of clutter in Tollcross, they were far from the only one. And moving on, we decided we needed to evaluate clutter sources across the city. So we were then successful in a funding bid to the charity Pass for All and their Smarter Choices, Smarter Places Open Fund. And we got support from Living Streets UK and match funding from the City Council. We did the field work in 4 localities, as they were described, across the city in the summer of 2019. And then last year, in 2020, we published our Cut the Clutter report, and we launched a 5-minute video, which is available. And I guess that link can be made available to people. So Cut the Clutter was our what we thought up. We should have copyrighted it and charged Living Streets UK an exorbitant royalty fee. Anyway, moving on. What were the key findings from that clutter report? We identified 290 items across the city. Our target was actually 100, so we found an awful lot more than perhaps was expected. The 4 most common types of clutter were, firstly, signage and poles, secondly, vegetation, thirdly, bins of all descriptions, and fourthly, guardrails. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure that people will be able to see that slide. However, the final bullet point makes the point that clutter attracts clutter. We found that if you got one type of clutter, other things tended to happen nearby. Moving on to the next slide, our conclusions and recommendations. We were very conscious on the resource constraints on the council's own action. I'm guessing, like in England and Wales, local authorities in Scotland have been extremely strapped for resources over the last 5 or 10 years, and some difficult choices have to be made. But on an equally fundamental level, we found that there were cultural, corporate, and cross-departmental problems. No less than 8 different sections or departments of the council involved in aspects of street management which affect clutter. So our first recommendation was the council really needed inspired and inspiring leadership to drive forward a different attitude to street management. And we felt that that street management should be holistic rather than split across all kinds of departments. One of the key things that concerned us was that there was not a single officer dedicated to walking in the transport staff. The active travel section very much dedicated to cycling and walking, the poor relation. Now, some of this stuff can take a long time. There are potential quick wins though. Taking out unnecessary signage and poles, asking residents to cut back hedges and overhanging foliage, and managing roadworks properly. And just to mention here a slide which shows how a roadworks diversion sign completely occupies the pavement, which shows such a lack of consideration for pedestrians' interests. But it's not just about local action. We think that national action is very important, and we hope that Living Streets UK will take this on board. The professional institutes tied up with highways and transportation and engineering really need to take on the clutter perspective and to introduce that into their programs. And equally, the utility companies, telecoms, Royal Mail, etc., they need to understand how their equipment, and some of it no longer used, create such a barrier to walking. The penultimate slide is about some quick wins, and I don't have the time to talk these through, but what they illustrate is how easy it is to take out poles that are blocking the pavement, to get hedges cut back, and to take out big signs that are no longer serving any particular useful purpose. And as we see in this last slide, one success leads to another. I've put up a bullet point which says the City Council now fully recognises the problem, but I've added a question mark because it's still the case that the culture is not fully changed. We find some parts of the council very receptive, other parts not so receptive. So it takes a long time to change attitudes. However, in 2020, a new opportunity came through in the Spaces for People initiative promoted by Transport Scotland in response to the pandemic. And the council voted through, courtesy of Transport Scotland, £300,000 to help declutter Spaces for People corridors. But it has to be said that the progress has been quite slow. So we have to keep reminding the council that, in their own words, quote, pedestrians are top of the urban transport hierarchy, unquote. Thank you, and sorry about all these problems getting this across.
Thank you so much. Ooh. Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and we'll make sure that David's presentation is circulated to people so that you can see it. We now are really honoured to welcome Katie Pennick. She's talking to us. She's the campaigns lead at Transport for All. Allow me to find her for you now.
Hi everyone. Am I ready to go?
Yep, you're ready to go.
Great.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Katie. I'm a white woman in my 20s with long brown hair and very winged eyeliner. I am the campaigns lead at Transport for All. Thank you so much to Living Streets for inviting me today. Street clutter and other issues with the accessibility of street space and pavements is honestly my favorite topic. I could talk for hours about this, but I'll try and do a kind of whistle-stop tour in 10 minutes or so. So I'm from Transport for All. If you don't know us as an organisation, we are a pan-impairment disabled people's organisation that campaigns for accessible transport. So we really believe that disabled people should be able to make journeys with the same independence, freedom, confidence as everyone else. And we look at all the forms of transport, so not only the modal forms of transport, but also street space, active travel, walking, wheeling and cycling. We're a membership organisation, so we represent the interests of our members, and we're pan-impairment, so we represent the interests of disabled people from across the impairment group. So not just wheelchair users such as myself, but blind and visually impaired people, deaf people, neurodivergent people, everyone. And we make change in lots of different ways. We have our Access Rights Advice Line, which is an advice line. People can contact us with any issues that they're experiencing accessing transport, and we take those cases on and advocate for them, work very closely with the transport sector to kind of raise these issues. We have a consultancy arm. We partner with various local authorities and transport providers and offer kind of disability equality training and consultancy services. And then we have our campaigns, which is what I lead on. So we have been campaigning on issues to do with street space for decades, especially things around the lack of drop curbs, especially in areas in central London where there are certain areas that are incredibly problematic for this issue. But it's never gotten a huge deal of traction, and something good that has come out of the pandemic has been this sort of spotlight that has been shone on the street space as more people have been kind of making those active travel journeys. It has really raised the profile of that. So we're just trying to use this kind of intense focus that is on the streets to raise the profile of these issues. So last July in the summer, we held a campaigns forum very similar to this one, where we gathered our members and other members of the disabled community to discuss issues with changes to the street space. And in that meeting, about 81% of those that we polled felt concerned that the new normal and the streets of the new normal would be inaccessible to them. But it's really important to remember that the old normal, what we had before, was already so inaccessible. So there were so many barriers including the lack of dropped curbs, inconsistent or missing tactile paving. If you're unfamiliar, that is the sort of bobbled paving that visually impaired people can use to identify when there's hazards, for example, coming up to a crossing. Uneven or steep pavements, uneven pavements that are uneven because of tree roots or poorly maintained paving slabs, potholes, bollards, and street clutter make the streets incredibly difficult to traverse if you are disabled. And I really can't overstate the impact that it has on disabled people. So for people who have a mobility impairment, for example, wheelchair users such as myself, street clutter causes a physical obstruction. If I come up to bins that are lying around, or perhaps an e-scooter that has been left sort of in the middle of a pavement, A-boards, signs, bollards, traffic cones, any of these things, it really is the same to me anyway as a car parked over the pavement, because I'm unable to move it. And if it's obstructing the whole of the pavement, I simply cannot get through. There's really no way around it. For people who are visually impaired, it actually presents a hazard. If you can't identify that you're coming up to a trip hazard, there have been so many incidences of visually impaired people being injured by trip hazards. For neurodivergent people, for example, if you're autistic, there being lots of street clutter around can be really confusing and disorientating, and it makes wayfinding even more difficult than it already is. So there's a whole various plethora of barriers that are created just from street clutter. And the impact of that is simply that it leads disabled people to not bother attempting these journeys. If disabled people come across the same barriers over and over again, especially if there's a sort of particular area that is known to be particularly bad or problematic, it really does damage people's confidence, and just don't have the energy to keep kind of fighting the same battles. As shown in our Pave the Way research that we published earlier this year, it does lead to disabled people using the car to make journeys, because making a journey using active travel means using the pavements is so unattractive because of these barriers. Outdoor furniture that has become popular as we start to reopen has only complicated matters further. So now that we see a lot of businesses, cafes, restaurants putting chairs and tables outside on the pavements, this is obviously just kind of layered onto an already very difficult situation. So we wanted to do something about it. We identified Soho as a sort of case study. We decided to kind of target action in Soho because we knew that it was a particular instance of it being very difficult in Soho. As things sort of started to open up in May earlier this year, maybe a bit earlier, April, May time of earlier this year, I think it was something like 900 licenses that Westminster granted to various businesses across the borough to allow them to put chairs and tables on the pavement. And unfortunately, as the pavements were already incredibly narrow in some areas in Soho, this just led to pavements being completely impassable if you were a wheelchair user or if you were a visually impaired person with a guide dog. So we took issue with this and decided to campaign on it, sort of, treating it like a case study. Early in May, we sent a letter to Westminster Council detailing the very many accessibility issues that we came across in Soho. You can read a copy of that letter. It's on our website. I'll put a link to it in the chat in a bit. We then launched a public campaign using social media to kind of put the message out. You may have come across a video that we published showing me trying to get through the pavements in Soho. And that was really powerful, I think, in demonstrating to people who are perhaps unfamiliar with what that looks like and what that means, and perhaps hadn't considered it before. It was a very useful way of kind of putting people in that position and seeing exactly what we mean when we say, you know, the pavements are becoming impassable. We were really delighted with the way in which Westminster acted off the back of that. They showed real kind of quick and decisive action, really listening and valuing the lived experience of disabled people. And they made sort of 3 immediate commitments. The first of which was they committed to maintaining a 1.8 to 2 metre wide gap on all of their pavements. That was actually a condition that was specified in the licenses that they granted to businesses. So it was more a case of enforcing that. So in order to enforce what was already in their licenses, they issued written reminders to all of the businesses and followed this up with on-site visits. And they also then had kind of roaming city inspectors to ensure that this was still being done. Where the pavement is too narrow to have outdoor dining on it, the businesses shouldn't be putting chairs and tables on those pavements. They also installed...
Katie, you've got 1 minute left.
All right, okay, I'm going to wrap that up. Off the back of this work in Westminster, we have written something that we're calling the Equal Pavements Pledge, which is a list of short, immediate solutions that local authorities can put in place to improve the accessibility of their streets as they open up over the summer. We'll be publishing that list on Monday and encouraging local authorities to take the pledge and sign up to it. So keep an eye out for that on Monday. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat now to our website where you can read more about what we do.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Katie. So fascinating. And hopefully you can see some of the links that are in the chat, so you can read more about that. What we're going to do is we're going to have a short break so that you can have a little break from the screen, and then we're going to come back at just before 1:05. We're going to have another couple of speakers, and then we're going to go to our questions. Okay, so please return at 1:05 and do whatever you need. Thank you.
I can't hear anything.
So we're just having a short break and we'll be back at 1:05. So if you've just joined us, then we'll be returning in just a few moments to start the second half of the session. Thank you for joining. And please look at the chat during this break. Hello, welcome back. So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Matthew Cunningham. He's our engagement coordinator here at Living Streets.
There you go, I'm on. Hi, my name's Matthew. I'm a white man in my 40s. I have a beard and, even if I do say so myself, a nice new haircut. I need my script to show up there. Wait a moment. Okay, so I want to talk about our new cut, the Clutter campaign, just very briefly to put in context, what Living Streets is about to try and do on this issue now. So everything Living Streets has ever achieved has been thanks to its members and supporters, people like us, I think, who love our streets, but many of whom are exposed to the problems that we're trying to fix, whatever the issue is at any given time. Now, changing things requires critical mass, and that usually means reaching out, building alliances, and most crucially of all, bringing people on board. Now, like most things that Living Streets and our members have ever campaigned for, and I'm pretty sure this probably applies to a lot of people in this session, is when we talk about what we do beyond to people that are outside perhaps our warmest audiences, but outside let's say the choir, we have a two-part reaction, and that is, the first part is, well, I never thought of that. But if we explain it right, they go straight onto, but now that you mention it, it's obvious that that needs to be improved. So the key really is getting from that first part to that second part as fast as possible. Now, pavement clutter is an obstacle for so many of us. It makes streets unsafe. It makes getting around anything from a nuisance to like impossible, as we've heard already from the stories that Katie has described, with the brilliant stuff that she did around Soho as well, which exemplifies it so well. But pavement clutter also presents a huge obstacle to politicians' ambitions to reduce carbon emissions by getting more people travelling actively. Because put simply, if we want people to travel actively more, we need accessible streets. So there's all sorts of like wins here. But explaining that really is what it's going to get us through isn't going to be about the usual, you know, we see this all the time, that just providing people with the kind of just the costs involved doesn't always work. Sometimes we need those personal stories, and the best people to explain all issues and the very specific issues around clutter are people whose experience means it's a daily reality. So back what I was saying, like with Living Streets owing everything it's achieved to its members. Today we have around 3,000, and I emailed our members to ask them how clutter affected them and their neighbours where they live, and we got really interesting responses. It's the same sort of stuff that David was referring to. You know, it's a mix of A boards and bins. Poorly placed bike racks comes up. You know, this is something that, you know, Living Streets as the voice of pedestrians, a lot of our members are really keen to highlight how sometimes there is that borderline between what pavements are for, you know, and the conflict with bike spaces, something that a lot of our, you know, members will raise. But also more of the responses highlighted, you know, especially over time, and this has been a more recent thing, that people have introduced this, the stories that tell us what a problem e-chargers, electric vehicle chargers are, and the cables that come with them. I was interested to see quite so many mentions of overgrown hedges, and of course, then in the rollout of changes to our street space following the pandemic, we've seen the increasing cases of cafe furniture appearing on pavements and pushing people out into the roads. There are also, of course, as anyone that's familiar with our campaigning would expect, there were a lot of people that wanted to talk about pavement parking. But pavement parking, of course, is, you know, we have a separate campaign on that. And while it does play, you know, it does feature in this, they are, you know, cars and vehicles parked on the pavement are an aspect of clutter. We are campaigning on that separately, and we are making progress on that. But the distinction really with this is interesting is that there are already laws of one type or another that exist, and we are striving for better laws in this case. And that was something that was highlighted in other remarks that we got from our members, is that it doesn't really apply at the moment in quite the same way with pavement space.
Matt, you've got 1 minute left.
Okay, a lot of people drew attention to the need for best practice and even a code when it comes to pavement space, and that, you know, that's something that's, you know, that's we're seeing with Transport for All's Equal Pavement Pledge, and we're really looking forward to seeing that, you know, build momentum. So first person evidence is what is going to help us build this critical mass, get wider support, and cut straight from the never thought of that to the, oh, isn't it obvious? And that's what we're aiming for with our Cut the Clutter campaign. So 12th to the 18th of July is going to be our Cut the Clutter week of action. We want to build a picture of how big a problem clutter is across the country. We want you to help us populate an interactive map that maps the problem around the country, and we're going to make it easy for people to write to their local council. But from today, I also be really great if people could go to social media, send us photographs, send us videos like the one that Katie described, look at our timeline over the coming weeks to see what we're looking for. Help us gather testimony of the obstacles that we're facing as we move around our towns and cities. Use the hashtag Cut the Clutter and at Living Streets In so that we can see it. Maybe also tag in your councillors and your MPs so the decision makers see it. This isn't something that we're going to fix overnight. There are already maps, for instance, to get councils to fix things. Working within existing parameters, though, risks becoming a sticking plaster approach, putting out one fire at a time, and that's if we're lucky. We need change not just on a case-by-case basis, we need changes in attitude, in priority, and changes in our culture. So we're already seeing the sorts of successes described by David and Katie, and that's what our Cut the Clutter campaign is aimed for. So this is just the start. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Matt. Right, so I'm just going to changeover interpreters for us. And so now we have Sarah Berry from our Lambeth Living Streets group, who will be talking about what they've been up to.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me today. I've loved hearing from all of the speakers far. I've become a member and set up a donation for Transport to All while this conversation has been happening. I'm so grateful to our interpreters here today and to Living Streets for setting this up. My name is Sarah Berry. I'm a fat white woman in her late 20s. I've got brown hair. I look very nice today, if I do say so myself. I'm on holidays in Cornwall. The tan is working well for me. Hopefully you agree. I am with Lambeth Living Streets, and I'm here to talk to you today about some of the work that we've been doing on changing perceptions on who our streets are for. And I think that this is a really important factor for when it comes to pavement clutter. And stick with me here when thinking about this. One of the reasons for that, I think, is that for the most part, people think our streets are for cars. And so for the most part, priority is given to moving as many cars as we can with as little inconvenience to those cars as possible. So that means when someone is thinking about what is the most considerate way to park that I can park, it's, well, I'm going to get my car as far off the road as possible so I don't obstruct any other cars that are trying to get around. When people are thinking about where they're going to put signage about road work, they're thinking, well, I want it somewhere that's going to be really visible for drivers, but that's not going to obstruct the road in any way. When people are thinking about, again, you know, I've seen comments in the chat, where are we going to put bike parking? Where are we going to put all of these different things? The answer to that question is always, well, let's put it somewhere where it won't disrupt the traffic. So the work that we've been doing in Lambeth Living Streets has been around shifting that perception that our roads and our streets aren't for cars, our roads and our streets are for people, and changing this idea to make it that the purpose of these spaces should be for people to be able to move, but also for people to be able to come together, for communities to be able to interact. And hopefully alongside that changing perception of who our roads are for, that we'll also be able to make a culture that's more conducive to action on things like ending pavement clutter. So one of the ways that we've done that, you'll see this example here of a road open to sign that we designed and distributed in collaboration with some other local campaigners when LTNs were introduced in Lambeth to all of a sudden, all you would see around everywhere when the LTNs were introduced were these road closed signs that spoke only to drivers, spoke to only to drivers of cars and vehicles that were not permitted to go through. It didn't speak to the public transport users who were on the buses. It didn't speak to the people who were able to cycle through or wheel through or scoot through, to the people who were still able to walk on the pavements and have a space that was sort of more open to people. And we really wanted to create something that would shift that perception, shift that idea of who is this space for. And it's been really controversial to shift those conversations. I'm sure everyone here is aware of the sort of conversations that are going on in the public right now about who our streets are for and who that space belongs to. But one of the things that we found in Lambeth is we've been really proactive with these roads are for people, not for cars messaging for a year now. And started sort of in conjunction with the pandemic, and we've noticed a massive change in our area. And obviously we're very lucky. We have, you know, an environment that's right for that. 70% of local residents don't have access to a car. 80% walk as their main form of transportation in the borough. So, you know, we're sort of the perfect test case for it. But, you know, now you're just as likely to see on our streets a busker performing a song, wheelchair users and mobility scooter users using the pavements or using the roads to move around. A marching band came down the middle of the main street in my local area the other day as a surprise for the local community at 9 o'clock in the morning, and people joined in and went down that street. And what we're noticing is that the actual perception of, you know, what is this space for, who is it for, is changing. And alongside of that, we're seeing a lot more support for interventions like street seating and parklets that are put in the parking spaces rather than on the pavements themselves, and the same thing with bike storage being put in there. And as Lambeth Council get ready to prepare their new curbside strategy this year, we're going to be using that environment that we've sort of tried to help create to really push for making sure that the pavements are wider and the pavements are more accessible. I've only got 5 minutes here today, so I'm going to leave it off there, but I put out an idea that was put forward by one of my favorite ever thinkers, Jane Jacobs, who is an urbanist and a town planner that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. She put that in any urban environment, a pavement should be a minimum of 35 feet wide in order to cater for all of the different activities that could happen there, which includes children skipping, trees for shades, people in wheelchairs or on bicycles being able to get around, and vendors being able to sell their wares. And I don't know if there'd be any pavement in London that would fit Jane Jacobs' idea of what the minimum standard should be. But I always love thinking about that whenever I think about what the vision of what our pavements can look like, and set that as the standard for what we should be dreaming for. But that's it for me today. Thanks for having me, Aisha, and it's been wonderful hearing from everyone.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So much there to consider. So now we have our policy manager in Living Streets, who's going to give us a little bit of an overview of what's happening in the wider, but also when we come to the question and answer session, which we're starting shortly, you know that she's present and can answer any questions. So over to you, Rachel. And you're muted at the moment.
Classic. Okay, I'm a middle-aged white woman. I have a 4-year-old who keeps me on my toes. I'm sitting in rural Cambridgeshire in my spare room. Pleased to be with you today. So I'm just really going to give you a bit of an overview of the big picture. When I first joined Living Streets in 2012, my first job was to bring together our report on the state of our streets. And this covered a whole range of issues, including those that we've talked about today around clutter and accessibility, which are about how streets are managed and maintained. And the reason I bring this up is because over the years, so many issues have largely remained the same. So does this mean we've made no progress? And I just want to say right now, not at all. Walking and active travel have gained such a high profile really over the years, often in the context of public health and tackling air pollution and climate change. So for example, in 2015, we had the first ever cycling and walking investment strategy. In 2018, as a result of that, we had the cycling and walking safety review, from which we got the review of the highway code. And we expect that to come out later this year with an announcement about a hierarchy of road users, where pedestrians are actually on top. So that introduces an issue around responsibility. So all road users are responsible towards each other, but those that have the potential to cause the most harm have the most responsibility. And of course, if we look at COVID and lockdowns, we've had a much greater awareness and appreciation of walking for its physical and mental health benefits, and the opportunity there for local authorities to create space for walking, for social distancing. But of course, that also brought in unintended consequences for disabled people. And the revised network management guidance placed a much greater emphasis on consultation, especially with blind and partially sighted people. So I just wanted to sort of provide a bit of background on some of the things that have happened in the years since I've joined Living Streets. But of course, while that has happened, we still have these everyday barriers to walking, and they remain largely the same. And keeping the spotlight on those can be very difficult because, as we've heard today, it can take a long time to get a result. And pavement parking is a real case in point there. We're still waiting a year on, more than a year, for an announcement on the consultation on the options for England, for instance. And, you know, we've seen in Edinburgh, it took a long time. David showed us that. Katie's shown us how enforcement by local authorities is key to effective action. Sarah's challenged our idea of what a pavement should be. So our Cut the Clutter campaign really tries to tie together some of our long-running campaigns while bringing a renewed focus on the pedestrian environment to a wider audience. We want people to expect more, and we want them to challenge the status quo. So thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to all the questions. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And so now we're going to have your questions. And so thank you for asking them through the chat. I think that we'll go through the questions, and actually, because of time, I wonder whether people be okay to stay until 35 past the hour. So we'll be carrying on until 35 past. If you need to leave, then we understand. But it'd be really nice to have an opportunity to ask some of these excellent questions that you've put to our speakers. So one of the questions that we could start off with is to you, David, in Edinburgh. So a question from Helen Willman was that have the experience of cutting the clutter in more suburban areas, was that included in your work? What are the differences in clutter or the ways that you approached it?
Yes, thanks. It's a good question. When we did our field work in 2019-2020, we looked at inner city and suburban areas. And one of the things that I would say was more characteristic of the suburban areas was the problem with hedges overhanging and foliage, branches from trees, really very prevalent. And on the face of it, you would say, well, that's quite a simple problem to solve. But I think one of the issues is that it's labour intensive for the council to go out and speak to individual homeowners. And I think we got the impression too that it can be a wee bit confrontational. Depends, what sort of suburb you're in, what kind of people you're meeting. Some people are just not interested in the public realm and how they can help. So we suggested, well, is there another tack? Could you perhaps produce leaflets, other ways of communicating that are less one-to-one, less individual? I think the jury's still out in that. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But that was certainly one of the distinctive aspects of suburban areas.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really good to hear that distinction. So the next question we have is it's for you, Katie. A lot of questions coming in about Transport for All and the wonderful work that you're doing. And the questions coming about how can we best support the work of Transport for All? I'm wondering whether you'd be able to, you sent us some links, and I'm wondering whether there's anything else. Allow me to.
Yeah, absolutely. Start my video, hang on. Hello. There are lots of different ways in which you can support us, and it depends on what sort of support you want to give and what you're interested in. We're a membership organisation, and we're really driven by the work by our members. So if you'd like to become a member, I've dropped the link in the chat box. You can sign up, it's free. And you can feed into our campaigns and shape the work that we do. We're a charity first and foremost. We completely rely upon donations and grants. We don't receive any public funding, any government funding. So if you're able to financially support us, I also dropped the link to the donation box. Follow us. We're most active on Twitter in terms of social media. So follow us on Twitter and share the work that we do. And also our ARA scheme, our Access Rights Advice Line, is really our eyes and ears. So if you come across an issue pertaining to accessing transport in the broader sense, obviously, any kind of journeys, if you encounter an issue or if you spot something, give us a call, email us, contact us via the website, because this is the way that we collect data, and we're increasingly trying to be a data-driven campaigning organization. So we rely on case studies, people on the ground, like seeing things, experiencing things. We're always blowing the trumpet for valuing lived experience. So if you're experiencing something, tell us about it and we can try and do something about it.
Lovely, thank you so much. So now we've got another question. I'm going to put this to you, Matthew. And it's about, do our local councils have the powers they need to solve problems? Or are we looking to businesses?
So is my mic working now? I might want to defer some of this to Rachel, actually, in terms of do they have powers? I like the aspect of the second part of it. Do we look to businesses? I think it'd be, we have the opportunity to branch out with this issue, because I think that we are already demonstrating good alliances with different organisations who can focus on different aspects, and it would be interesting to look at the powers that individual businesses might have in setting a better example. It's interesting to see that that has been in a way that's the approach that Westminster are taking in Soho. What powers the council have at the moment? Yeah, I'm going to totally defer to Rachel.
Lovely. Thank you. And yeah, we're kind of a follow-up part of that question as well, Rachel, about people feeling that they are contacting their council. Hello, I've got a face as well. They're contacting their council, but they're not actually getting anywhere. They're not getting the response that we would hope. So again, kind of that question of what powers do they have to be clearing the clutter on the streets?
David covered the issue that councils face really effectively, and that's how responsibility can be spread across many different departments. And really, like a lot of places now, the issue is around capacity for local authorities. Not only in terms of funding cuts, cutting staff, contracting of various things like hedge cutting, or maintenance and bins, etc. All of that can reduce, how can I say, their ability to do things that we want, but also the response time that you would have to any complaints that you make, because they have to deliver the essential services first. So I'm not making excuses for councils, but this is why it's going to be difficult sometimes to get any kind of response. Have they got the powers that they need? I'm sure they do, yes. Do they have the resource that they need? Not necessarily. And this is where, working with companies, shops, cafes, business, essentially, I think is really important, because they will have the resource to place their A-boards in a more responsible way, or to remove them altogether, So it needs to be a partnership approach, and using, for example, business improvement districts as an organisation to work with is really important. And generally, they can be quite receptive. So yeah, I think it's just the communication is key, and having a willingness to change.
Very much. And I think just one last question would be, I'm not sure who would be best to answer this. So one of the questions, and I think actually Katie, if I could bring you in on this, a question kind of coming around about disability awareness. Obviously, we know that pavement clutter actually makes people feel disabled because of those obstacles, and for many people, disabled people, parents, older people. But I'm wondering whether or not you would suggest from your work about local authorities doing disability awareness courses, so that they have a better understanding of some of the issues that they pose for people that are non-disabled.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is definitely something that we advocate for, and that is one of the services that we offer. So hang on, sorry, just hello. So through our access partner work, we try to partner with as many local authorities as we can across the UK, and one of the services that we offer is disability equality training for all of their team, their transport team, their planning team, and this is done so that any kind of future schemes, policy decisions, interventions are designed with the social model of disability and accessibility really at the heart of it. We see accessibility as an absolute fundamental, something that has to be baked into everything that is planned and devised. It's not something that can be tacked on at the end. It's not something that can be fit retrospectively. It's something that has to be completely embedded in any of the decisions that are made. But it is so lacking, and we understand that local authorities' resources and funding and time and staff abilities are so varied across the UK. But that is something that we try and do. Another thing that we've kind of been talking a lot about and working on is the kind of model of engagement that a lot of local authorities and transport authorities use, which is a heavy reliance upon more kind of informal methods of engagement, kind of disability forums or consultation with residents. And unfortunately, what happens is that as a disabled person living in a particular area or having a particular experience, you are called upon so often, time and time again, to essentially give your feedback on a particular scheme. You're expected to give your time and expertise for free. And it is exhausting, and there's such a heavy reliance upon this form of engagement. We're trying to turn that around, and we're trying to see accessibility professionalized, and see kind of disabled experts brought in as kind of co-producers of schemes. That's a huge piece of work, and that's something that we're working on in the background. But certainly, if you ever have kind of any leverage or any ear of someone at a local authority, send them our way, and we would like to deliver disability equality training to them.
Thank you so much. And actually, I think that's a really good point to end on, not only because our time is over, and I think that there's a lot more that we could discuss, but also just how crucial it is that there is awareness about disability, and that really needs to be paid for and brought in, and training given across the whole staff and embedded into design from the outset, so that not everybody who's here asks you to speak at their event, Katie, in the future, but brings in your expertise. So thank you very much for all of you that have attended here today. It's been really wonderful hearing all these different ideas and approaches, and kind of the broadness that we need to look at these issues from lots of different angles. And there's a lot of questions that have come in that we weren't able to answer, but we'll be doing a follow-up on this as well, in terms of looking through those questions and seeing what answers we can present. So thank you for interacting, for being so present with the chat, for spending your lunchtime with us, and we look forward to our week of action, which is starts the week commencing the 12th of July. It's the first week of many months and years of this work, but we wanted to condense it in a week where we'll be asking people to map the clutter issues in their areas, and put points on maps and send images, so that we can look at on a local level and a national level and work together to resolve these issues. So thank you very much. Thank you to both Claire and Nez for your interpreting with us today. Thank you, Deborah, for doing our captioning. And thank you to all of our speakers. It's been a really rich discussion, and plenty to consider after this. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And have a